Hi, folks. This is the last day of our membership drive for Suiting Up Varsity, and I thought I wanted to create a little document here about what we do and how we came to do it. So I thought the best way to really do it was just run you through the tabs that are often open on my computer screen. Obviously, our Patreon is open. Our Patreon has become a place where we share things with those people who support the project, and obviously a membership drive. We'd love you to become one of those people. Um, but I want to talk a little bit about where we came from and why we do what we do. One of the reasons is this book, Nebraska High School Sports by Jerry Mathers from 1980. A great historical document, one I discovered in high school and has been with me for a long time. And really, for a long time, through my career as a teacher and coach, one of my lifelong goals was to produce the next volume of this. Even by the time I discovered it in about 1984, I was already starting to get dated. And obviously now it's not going to be long till that book's 50 years old. Um, so I've wanted to create the follow up to that. Now, what exactly that looks like in the end, I'm not sure. But I've been trying to figure out for about the last 7 years. 7 years ago, in 2016, I started a podcast called Suiting Up Varsity. And that was a real practical step for me. One of the things about trying to create a book and a project that size is that you're just, what do you write first? How do you start? And just kind of discovering podcasting in 2015, listening to some great podcasts about very specific historical times or very specific interests. I think of Whistle Stop by John Dickerson and Hit Parade by Chris Malamphy, where I saw that you can take a very specific interest and turn it into a podcast that people will listen to. And the biggest thing for me was it started me writing. How do you start writing a book that's huge? Well, you do it one podcast episode at a time. And so the podcast kind of came from that. From the podcast came the Twitter feed, which started really in earnest in 2017 when I discovered access to all these old pictures and that people would like to see them. Uh, it's been a great way to share my project, a great way to get the word out about my project, and even better, and I didn't really realize this was going to happen, a source of information for me. That Twitter feed, where we now have over 10,000 followers, is a place where I can ask questions because this is a varied state. It's big. And I don't know all the parts of it like I know my own neighborhood. And the Twitter feed has people from all the neighborhoods. And so that helps a lot. Twitter feed is a very important part of what we do. And of course, you probably came to Suiting Up Varsity through that Twitter feed. Uh, we keep a web page where when we have special projects or special things, especially things that the Twitter feed helps us put together, um, we uh, we post it here and give people access to it. We actually have another web page we're associated with. That's my son's Nebraska High School helmet project, uh, and a lot of you have probably looked at the helmets on there or seen people who use the helmets in their school art. But really, the biggest project is the book, as I call it. I don't know if it ends up being a book, to tell you the truth. But one thing I've done on the Patreon is, as I've started to write histories of the closed high schools. I have about 100 of them done so far, and they're all posted on our Patreon. If you want to read about the Bartley Bombers or the Rock County Tigers, the Beatrice St. Joseph Red Ravens, the Beaver City Bearcats, Beaver Crossing Beavers, they're here. And they have pictures and they have all our data we've gathered on these schools. And they have my attempt to kind of write the history of the school and talk about the high points and the golden ages and the big teams and games and names and their history. And those are all available through our Patreon. And I think in the end, this is kind of how the book ends up looking. a history of each school in Nebraska. I'm sure there'll be other sections. And on our Patreon, I've also published, a history of the state basketball tournament and its formats and its locations. I've published my deep dive into how school consolidation worked in the late 50s and 60s in Nebraska, which helps explain how we got some of the schools we did. But really, this is my biggest project, and this is what I make available on the Patreon. As I write each of these, they go up the day I get them ready. All right. I wanted to go beyond our products though and talk a little bit about our purpose, which I think is bigger than whatever we end up producing. One thing that has been very valuable has been our association with the Nebraska High School Sports Hall of Fame. When I first started this project, I went wandering in there. I had never been there. I didn't know the guys. They didn't know me. And since then, I think we've developed a great working relationship. I've recently joined the Hall of Fame's board, and I'm trying to help in that way. But also, I think the Twitter feed was able to help a lot. If you've ever been in there, they have great digital displays. It's a very modern museum. Good grief, if you haven't been there, folks, get there in the Haymarket. But a lot of the pictures that we've published through the Twitter feed, they've incorporated in their displays. They've reached out to me saying, "Hey, we need a picture of this," and I've gone looking for it for them. They've helped me a lot. We've worked together on some projects to try to patch some historical holes, which both of us are very interested in, and so that's become a big part of our purpose is helping out the Nebraska High School Hall of Fame. The other of our purposes is what I call preservation of history. Nebraska high school sports is not World War II. Uh, it's not the development of the nuclear bomb. It's not the New Deal. Okay, its history is not life or death, but it's important to lots of people, and especially each of those little schools. Uh, I've traveled around to lots of little towns, and some places it's starting to get tough to see where the school was, you know? And I know that doesn't matter to some people, but it matters to people who grew up in those towns. And so one thing we want to try to do is preserve the history of those schools, especially the closed ones. And one of the places we started was just on this nickname list, you know. And our project you'll find is built around a lot of lists because as I wrote the podcast episodes, as I started to do the writing, uh, sometimes you'd realize, oh, I can't really say that. I don't really know if that's really the way it is. And so we started putting all this data together so that I could check and we could say definitively, yeah, this is that. And one of the places we started was just a nickname list, which is a lot of fun. This is something you get access to on the Patreon, along with lots of other lists. Here's another one I started conference champions. I just started making a list of conference champions by year. And it started to be amazing to me how many of those were lost. You know, the schools don't have records of them, nobody has records of them. My document now is about 250 pages long. Big conferences, little conferences, conferences I had never heard of before, conferences you've heard of a lot. And you see there's still gaps. But every time I run across one, when I'm searching for something else, I try to put it in here. Um, to me, conference championships are really important if you care about high school sports because a lot of that's the top accomplishment for lots of people and coaches and teams and even schools. Sometimes the brightest spot in their history is winning a conference championship. They didn't celebrate on TV in Lincoln, but it doesn't mean it should be forgotten. In conjunction with that, I started tracking county tournaments. Winners of county tournaments, definitely something that's been lost as the county tournaments have kind of disappeared through consolidation. But those type of things. We have a lot of a special history that way, and we try to preserve it and make sure it's not going to be lost. And we try to help the schools. One of the services we offer through the Patreon is a complete history of your high school, everything we have about them, every picture, every championship, every all-stater, every this, every that. Um, that sometimes again can be lost. A lot of times when schools are working on their trophy cases, they'll have somebody call and say, "Hey, my grandpa was all-state football," and they want to put that guy up there, but they don't have any way to validate it and make sure it's really true, because it's the guy's grandpa. And you're like, oh, maybe he was. We can help them with that. We've put together all state lists, not just in football and basketball, because actually the World Herald has come through in recent years and started to produce that for people. But soccer, softball, baseball, anywhere that all state teams will be honored, we try to work with all the different papers and all the different groups that have published those, and we just keep trying to put them together so we have as complete a list as possible for schools. The other list we're trying to put together is complete a list of possible schools. This is our data of what class schools competed in basketball every year, boys basketball. And this gives me a very interesting number because I've written about 100 high school histories right now, 100 different schools. And this list says there were 820, actually, I think 819 um, high schools that have played in district basketball. So it means I'm almost 1/8 of the way through. Now, there's a few schools that didn't play district basketball but competed maybe in county tournaments or in state track, things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if the number creeps to 850. But, that's something. A lot of these schools uh, are starting to be lost to history. And then you add in all the co-ops and things like that we also try to track. And it's easy for things to fall through the gap. And it doesn't have to be from 1919 to fall through the cracks. Here's my district track champions list. I tell you, back here in the 40s and 50s, I've got all the champions. Where I get into trouble is in the 70s and 80s when the small town newspapers have started to close down. It's tough to track those down, and there's definitely no list anywhere. And so we're working on putting that together because a district track championship, that's a big deal. That's a big part of your school's history. Most schools don't just do that every year. And the ones that do it every year helps you to see what a big deal that was because they're so rare. Um, the other thing you'll find is there's kind of an internet dark hole. When the internet first started in the 90s and the early 2000s, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of been lost there that we really have to hunt and peck and look around to find. So preservation of these kind of things that otherwise, every day that goes by, I just think, okay, there's more chance that things are going to get lost, you know, and so we go looking. All right. This is about the Patreon, and we hope you'll join up. The Patreon has all kinds of things. History of schools, our greatest ever teams we try to pick, just different articles I do. I was looking back through here a while ago and I saw one about the 1914 state tournament and how weird the bracket was. Okay. Whenever we run across something interesting like that, we try to put it together. I did a little Mount Rushmore of officials from Nebraska because I ran across some big names, all kinds of things. That's on the Patreon. What does the Patreon help us support? Well, it takes a little money to run this operation. And so the Patreon kind of takes the sting out of that. When you have a hobby and it costs a little bit of money and you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Hosting the podcast costs a little bit of money. Um, Hosting the websites costs a little bit of money. Um, travel traveling when I go to take pictures of old schools and things like that, or just when I go to so I can kind of understand an area, which schools are right next to each other. And unless you've been through all the areas, you don't quite understand why the rivalries were the rivalries. When you start to see, oh, hey, there's one road right between those two, and you're like, okay, no wonder they like to beat each other. Our access to old newspapers costs a little bit of money each month. It costs me about $200 a month, and my goal for this membership drive was to get about half of that, to get to about 100, through people who are willing to pay $5 or $1. We have a few people who are $25 people, or I think you can pretty much pick any level you want. And so that's what we're trying to do, trying to get a little help as we run this project and try to preserve the history of Nebraska high school sports. So if you think you could jump in with $1 or more, please do it. Hope you enjoy the Twitter feed. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Hope you enjoy whatever products we produce at the end of all this. I always say, my deadline on this is death. Uh, and I'm 55 years old. So, I try to keep that deadline in mind. Hope you're having a great summer, and thanks for supporting Suiting Up Varsity.